Happy Christmas Eve. It's December 24th. It's a Tuesday. This Day Weather Podcast brought to you by Converse County Tourism. Douglas and Glen Rock, Wyoming are bustling with action this holiday season, so plan your excursion, including fun activities, beautiful downs, and historic treasures. Learn more at conversecountytourism.com. Well, everyone have a Merry Christmas. We will take a break tomorrow, but we'll be back with the podcast on Thursday morning. We're going to be looking at a small system coming through Christmas Day tomorrow, especially for folks in the mountains of Utah, Colorado, and western Wyoming and the western valleys. West of the Divide, you've got the best chance of a white Christmas. East of the Divide, there'll just be a few snow flurries or snow showers. But we will, on Christmas Day, have a little bit of weather. The pattern is changing after Christmas. A very active Pacific little wave train is going to get going again. And this is going to bring increasing mountain snow. Boy, this is a pattern for skiers and snowmobilers and cross-country skiers. If you've been wanting for Christmas some fresh snow on the ground to go play in, especially through the New Year's week, boy, you're going to get your wish from Santa. We'll show you that here in a minute. We also are going to have possible travel concerns. I just kind of want to highlight late Sunday through Monday into early Tuesday. Parts of the Intermountain West will see some rough weather with one of these bigger pushes of cold, moist Pacific air coming on in, producing a bit more in the way of winter weather leading up to the new year. So put your antenna up if you're going to be wanting to travel in the West during that time frame. And at the end of this podcast, we're going to talk about the warm, dry fall and winter we've had for many of you, and we've had several of these over the last decade. We're going to talk a little bit about why that's happening. And it's really all about the Pacific. Beautiful Kelvin Helmholtz clouds there in the Upper Green River Basin by Pinedale. Winds aloft and instability just right for those clouds to form. And a lot of lenticulars there in the Shirley Basin. Something missing in the Shirley Basin. I think probably most of you, especially folks familiar with the Shirley Basin, notice there's something really missing there for a late December photo. Down south into southern Colorado, we've got areas of lenticulars again, beautiful ones that have developed here over the past week. And more color in those skies in the nights and the evenings. There's a shot out of Nebraska that's not looking much like December, is it? Here's a great shot of something that's really unique. And for those of you who subscribe to CowboyStateDaily.com, there's a lot more here on this article from Tom about this petroglyph, which is designed to show when the winter solstice occurs, and you can see where the sun shines right there with those two lines. Really a neat situation. A lot of astronomical things going on with a lot of carving and petroglyphs across the West, probably some that we have found, some that are out there in the middle of nowhere. The satellite photo this morning shows a very impressive curl. That looks like quite the storm. Really is a strong system going into British Columbia. So it's going to be a wet Christmas Eve for Washington, Oregon, and Northern California into Idaho. You can see that the high pressure ridge, it's wanting to stay strong. You can see the clear skies right here ahead of that low and between the low that came through yesterday. It's just been the high that does not want to go away. But this system will attack it. It will weaken because of the high, but both will suffer. This will weaken, but so will the high pressure ridge, which is going to leave the door open for more Pacific waves. So there it is this morning, approaching the Pacific Northwest coast. Here's yesterday's little wave coming through, and here's that sliver of high pressure that's coming on by. Now, by tomorrow morning, by Christmas morning, the upper level low will have weakened. As you can see, it's not going to be as strong, but the high gets squished and really gets down to nothing here. This is going to produce snow in the mountains, snow showers along west of the Continental Divide. This is not a terribly strong or cold system, but if you're traveling on Christmas Day, you'll need to watch it. By Thursday morning, that low goes out into parts of eastern Oklahoma into northwest Arkansas. Then notice these very strong Pacific jet stream winds coming off the North Pacific, taking a beeline through the Pacific Northwest, then into the northern and central Rockies. And these little ripples, these little waves are lined up to now come in, now that the high is weakened, and we're going to see high pressure in the east. They're going to have a big warm up here. We're going to see colder, more unsettled weather come into the west. So between now and Thursday evening, this is the precipitation forecast for travelers. So you can see the wedge of moisture coming in from the Pacific Northwest between now and late Thursday. So there's that gradient from heaviest to lightest. But wherever you see the green here, and we'll highlight where the snow's going to be, this is the snow that will fall between now and late Thursday. The Northeast United States, the middle of the country is going to be quiet, at least temporarily. And then you can see if you're going to drive I-70 in Colorado in the mountains, I-15 in Utah, Interstate 80 in Wyoming, and across all the way to California, this is not a major storm, but there's going to be, if you're going to be traveling, tonight through tomorrow night into early Thursday, you're going to have some travel hazards there. Then obviously all of the mountain passes of the Intermountain West. It's going to be raining here in the middle part of the country where you see the heavier colors here across the southern plains. So let's take a little bit of a closer look, zooming in a little bit between now and late Thursday. Now let's go into the next systems, the next patterns. This is Friday morning. So Thursday night and Friday morning, a wave quickly moves through. Here's another wave. Here's another wave. And notice they're lined up coming in from the west-northwest. Northwest flow with the jet stream into the Pacific Northwest and the Northern Rockies is a great way to make it snow in the cold season. The reason is you're bringing in cold air aloft, which makes the atmosphere unstable, which it makes it easier for clouds to form. You're bringing in a good slug of Pacific moisture with each of these waves. Each of these waves will produce good snow in the mountains. And when they're lined up one after another like this, this is a snow factory for the higher terrain of the Pacific Northwest and the Central and the Northern Rockies. It's not a good pattern for the Four Corners. It's not a good pattern for Arizona and New Mexico. You need a different kind of pattern for those areas to get into the precipitation. But for the Northern and Central Rockies, this is what you want if you're a skier or a snowmobiler, to really kind of right the ship in terms of mountain snow. Now this is by Sunday morning. Here comes another wave. There's another wave behind it. And you can see the strong flow is continuing in the west. There's really no significant high pressure other than along the east coast here, then off the Baja. So what is going to happen is a pretty busy weather stretch after Christmas through the new year is going to develop really coast to coast. So we're going to have more travel problems in this period. When we go and take a look at Monday, the wave that's there Sunday quickly moves through, but notice colder conditions come in behind this system as we get into late Sunday night and Monday. Hence, this is where we're going to have a bit more in the way of wintry weather. Strong flow continues into the Rockies here well through Tuesday. This is the precipitable water starting today and going through Tuesday. What I want you to see here is where you see these green and blue patches coming through. These are the Pacific waves. So notice you get blue and green, a little sliver of brown and white, another plume of green and blue, green and blue, green and blue, until the last frame there, the colder, drier air coming in late Tuesday into New Year's Day, Wednesday will kind of put a gap in things, but you can see these plumes. So when you get plumes like this coming through, and when the air aloft is getting colder, and you're pushing those strong jet stream winds up against the higher terrain, this is what you get. So this is the total precipitation between now and next Tuesday. So you can see a lot of yellow, a lot of oranges, and a lot of reds. Look at Idaho. Look at the Pacific Northwest, the central mountains of Colorado and southern Wyoming. There's a gradient. You get less moisture. But notice out here, right here, this is where I think we're going to have some problems late Sunday into Monday with some wintry weather in this area right here. And you can see the lower elevations starting to finally maybe a chink enough in the armor of those high pressure ridges to get some weather through. So this is going to really change the dynamic, and this is what you've got snowfall-wise for the next week, for the next 7 days. Very impressive. And this is the area we need to watch for travel concerns early next week. So if you're a skier or a snowmobiler, get ready, because by New Year's Day, there's going to be a lot of new snow on the ski slopes and the cross country and the snowmobile trails. Also, we haven't been able to talk about avalanche danger because there really hasn't been any. Well, this is going to set the stage after the new year for avalanche dangers going up in the west because we've got a crusty snow that is going to get a lot of new snow on top of it. So if we zoom in for the same week period from today through next Tuesday, the opportunity for snowfall is certainly coming back now. Now let's go into the second part of this video. We're not going to talk about the forecast anymore. We're going to talk about why it's been so warm, why it's been so dry, and let's go and talk about the Pacific Decadal Oscillation. First of all, sea surface temperature anomalies across the globe look like this. Here across the Pacific is the La Nina. And the La Nina has reached its peak strength. Notice the North Pacific here has got some orange colors. It's getting warmer. It's warming up, which is something that the long-range models did predict. This area had been colder. It's getting warmer. This is going to lead to the high being further west in January and February, as we talked about in an earlier podcast. But the La Nina is there. And what's really important to show you is that when you're in a La Nina, parts of the western United States, it's a dry signal. It's a warm signal, especially when they occur spring through the fall season and into early winter. We've had this multiple times for the last decade and a half, really the last 20 years. And this year is really looking quite similar to 2012, which was very, very droughty for Wyoming, Nebraska, parts of Montana, parts of Colorado. We had a very wet year in 2011, then a very dry year in 2012, and that was a pattern somewhat similar to what we're experiencing now. Remember, it's hard to remember this, but 2023 was one of the wettest periods on record, especially parts of 2023 when we were in an El Nino phase. But now we've gone back to La Nina, and so we've had a similar situation. Wet 2011, dry 2012. Very wet 2022-23, very dry 2024. Now, the La Nina has strengthened the most when it's been the warmest and driest, which is November to where we are standing right now. So the La Nina really got going stronger again during this time frame, and that's really made the western United States warmer and drier. With the La Nina weakening, this is going to change the dynamic going into 2025. This is very important to point out, as I'm going to show you here in a minute. We have been in a negative PDO, which is a dry signal, since 1999. Now, there's been a few years where the PDO has gone positive since 1999 to present. However, the overall dominating Pacific state since 1999 has been negative, which is a warm and dry signal for the western United States. And you have this over decadal scales. So let's talk about La Nina where we are right now. What I meant by the La Nina getting strongest between November and present is right here. Remember, the more negative this graph is, the stronger the La Nina. See how it really got stronger? I know the arrow's pointing down, but the arrow pointing down in a La Nina means it's getting a lot stronger. See how it weakened there in October, but it was still very much negative? The La Nina weakened, but it's gotten some gas right here. And this has really coincided with the very warm and dry conditions. It changes the way the jet stream behaves. It changes the dynamic in the Pacific. And that really can monkey with our weather. And that's exactly what has happened. The good news is the latest forecast that has come out is showing the La Nina reaching its peak right now and weakening and going to a neutral phase. You even see some red bars here by spring. So this is good news if we were to venture into the long-term forecasting situation. But a lot of times things line up. It's like the stars line up to either bring extreme wet or extreme warm and dry. Because remember, it goes both ways. We had the other stars line up in late 22 to 23 to bring the wet conditions. What does it look like? Well, in the Pacific, during the negative phase of the PDO, the predominant pattern in the Pacific on the equator and off the coast of the North America and South America is cold, is represented by the purple and the blue here. The negative PDO is a drought signal, not continuously, but if you add up the number of years over decades, you'll have more drought than the other way. The warmer or positive Pacific phase is when the opposite happens. The subtropical Pacific is warmer. You have more El Niños. It's warmer along the coast of North America and South America. So you can see it's directly the opposite. And I want you to pay very close attention to this because I hear from a lot of people who grew up during these years. And they say, well, the weather now is nothing like it was in these years. You're right. It's nothing like that. But I want you to realize that where we're in right now, okay, I'm not doing very well. I wanted to say present. But from 1999 to current, we are in this phase. This phase also occurred from 1947 to 1976. Now, you can find a lot of drought years and a lot of decades, not unlike what we're experiencing now. So, if you grew up and experienced the weather in these years, do not expect these years, especially where we are currently, to be the same if the Pacific state is different, which it is. Now, let's graph what I just showed you. When we take a look at the periods that are colder in the western United States, and also this has a lot to do with precipitation. When we're in negative phases, like we are here, a very long negative phase here, and negative phases here, okay, you're going to be warmer in the west and more dry. Where you're in these warmer phases, you're going to be more wet. You might even be colder, but you're going to be more wet because really this is all about precipitation. Temperatures affected as well, but this is really about precipitation. Notice that basically these cold periods sometimes last pretty long. Sometimes the warm periods are shorter or longer. It all depends. But if you look at how precipitation patterns fall and how the winters are, it got a lot different after the period of 1999 to present. That's just where we are right now. This scale, this graph actually stops here at 2014, so it doesn't show currently where we're at. But if you were to go all the way through 2022, again, I'm going to harp on this a little bit more. This is since 1999, this line here. This is where we've been living life. With all the blue here, we've been in a negative PDO. Occasionally, we have these warm periods. These warm periods are when we get an El Nino. The last decade, the last 3 decades, we have been in this phase. We were in the opposite phase from the mid to late 70s through the late 90s. So we had this 20-year period of more storms, more cold, more snow in the west. Since then, things have changed to a colder phase. But when you look at what happens, the way it goes, we'll go back to this. It's going to happen. But we also go into these cold phases, and they tend to last 20 to 30 years or more. Now, there's no exact length of time these Pacific decadal oscillations will last, but they can be very stubborn, like what we had from the mid-40s to the mid-70s. This is something to point out right here. When we have more La Niñas, we're more droughty. When we have more El Niños, we're not as droughty. Look at 99 to 2022. We've had 7 El Niños, but we can now make this 13 La Niñas. Okay? Then if you go back and look at 78 to 98, it's the opposite. It flips. 10 El Niños, only 3 La Niñas. If we go back to the other cold phase, notice how they're almost identical right here. Remarkable how that works. So we're in a negative PDO. We have been since the late 90s. How long will this negative PDO last? Hard to tell you, but they usually don't go much more than 25 to 30 years or so. So we will cycle out of it. But if you're wondering why things are different from where we are now to the past, there's really good reasons for it. It's all about the Pacific. And when you step back, take a bigger picture, take a bigger look at weather patterns and how the oceans work and how they interact with the atmosphere, it's really, really quite remarkable how things line up when you take a look at temperature records and precipitation records. Remember this, the Earth is covered by 70% of water. So the atmosphere is touching that water. So 70% of the globe is water. So 70% of the atmosphere near the ground is touching that water. Sea surface temperatures and these ocean patterns and these ocean fluctuations are huge, especially in Western North America, because the Pacific is the #1 producer of water for us. Yes, we'll get Gulf of Mexico moisture. Yes, we'll get moisture in the summer coming up out of Central America and Mexico. But predominantly, it's the Pacific that provides us our water. So we have these different phases. So your weather you grew up in is not necessarily how the weather should be where you're living now because of these fluctuations. The Atlantic has its own PDO, so to speak. It's called the AMO. And what's interesting about that, they go through similar cycles as well. And where it gets really complicated is the PDO and the AMO sometimes are out of phase. This is a good example. We're currently in a negative PDO, but a positive AMO. But when they both are positive and when they're both negative, the Atlantic and the Pacific can really work together to really disrupt the weather pattern across the northern hemisphere. So you can see that. So here we are negative with the PDO, but we're positive with the AMO. And you can see where there's times when there's overlap. And this is really interesting because when they're both negative, like right here, and other situations to where they're both negative, and where there's overlap is when you get some really, really cold periods. And where they overlap, when they both are negative or they're both positive, where there is some overlap there, things can get really rowdy. And that really tends to disrupt temperature patterns and precipitation patterns across the globe when they are sync and when they're out of sync. So there's a lot of moving parts. I know I threw a lot at you there, but we'll talk more about the PDO in future podcasts and what's coming as we head into the new year. Have a very Merry Christmas.